You said something a minute ago that I find I don't find it offensive. I find it confusing. And I think you find my stance on that conflicting and confusing.
Well, and I thought of you yesterday when I saw this on the news, and it relates to a couple of subjects we talk about a lot, one being income inequality and one being hashtag AOC. So one of the things that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, said yesterday, that any economy that allows for anyone to be a billionaire is immoral. And I thought of you.
And you responded, why did you think of me when she said that?
Because I wondered to myself if you would agree with her on that.
No, I absolutely don't agree with her on that. I think that's a ridiculous thing to state and say.
Good.
And I said yesterday, Reb, I believe in the free market as much as anybody. I'm a product. I mean, my entire livelihood has been spent in the free market. I dabbled in politics, but the majority of my income earning has been in the free market, as most of our listeners has. I understand it. But because I was forced at a very early age to be responsible for running a family business. Not 12 or 13, but, 22, 23, 24 years old. I was in charge of making decisions that financially affected my livelihood and other people, employees of our family business. And out of that came an understanding, not as deep as some. I'm not an economics professor. I'm not a free market capitalist seminar giver. But I'm someone who has lived in the real world. And as a result of that, I believe in the virtues of the free market. As Milton Friedman said so eloquently many, many years ago, there's nothing that rivals capitalism when it comes to lifting people out of poverty into prosperity, improving the lot of the common man or woman. There's nothing that holds a candlelight to the power and dynamic of a free market. I believe that with every fiber of my being. I also am conflicted with the dynamic that the American financial, political, economic system are dealing with income inequality. I do think there's something wrong when the richest 1% continue to accumulate more and more and more of our nation's wealth, and the middle 20% stay very stagnant. I begin to wonder, are the middle 20% that lackadaisical and complacent? Or has there been some government policy or some government edict that has allowed for the 1% to be, dramatically more wealthy than they were 15, 20, 25 years ago? This has nothing to do, that has something to do, but not as much to do with CEO pay and compensation as you'd expect. I just think that we have, and I go back to something I talked about, I think Monday. Today's Wednesday. I think it was Monday when I talked about, the Davos Summit, the World Economic Forum. It's a who's who of the economic elite all over the world, not just America, all over the world. The Jamie Dimons of the world, the Lloyd Blankfeins of the world, the George Soros, the Warren Buffetts of the world. I don't think Buffett goes because he's kind of a common man. I mean, he likes to present himself as the billionaire next door. These other guys are very interested in policy, and I saw a lot of comments about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from Davos. I believe that there's something wrong with someone standing in a line at a grocery store with $100 worth of groceries charged on an EBT card, of which the American taxpayer is responsible for paying. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. But I think it's equally offensive that some way, somehow, our economic elites in Wall Street and Washington bailed out the 5 or 6 biggest banks in America. You can't be, in my humble opinion. I mean, and once again, this goes back to the school board debate. All I'm doing is giving my opinion. I can't give your opinion for you. I mean, I can't tell you where to land on issue A, Y, or A, B, or C, or X, Y, or I can't. I mean, that's not my job. My job is simply to tell you the issue we're talking about, where I stand and why I stand there. I think we've gained a little bit of traction with listeners because they believe we'll do that. They don't think we'll mislead. They believe when they listen to this show, whatever issue we talk about or take on, we're going to tell you what we believe. I believe that there's something wrong with an economic system and a government that allows someone to have in their hand a $600 iPhone 10 and in the other hand an EBT card. I think there's something fundamentally flawed in a country and a government that allows for that. Now, I understand waste, fraud, and abuse. I understand the imperfections of man, superposed against the imperfections of a political system, or superimposed against the imperfections of a political system. But I don't know how you can be aggravated by that man or woman in front of you at the grocery store with that $600 phone or that EBT card when you believe it's okay for our government to socialize $1.2 trillion in mistakes that the Davos class made. And the Davos class never missed a trip to Davos. The Davos class never missed a year of getting big bonuses and flying on their private jets. That's the offensive part. And that does lead me down the road of my Springsteen side. The belief that the system has been rigged for a certain super elite and they believe they're entitled. It's very easy for you and I to convince ourselves to chastise because there's a simplicity in that person with that phone and that ABT card. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But that makes no sense. I mean, that person's got a nicer phone than I do, and I got to pay for my groceries and they don't. In essence, I'm buying her groceries or his groceries so he can buy his phone or her phone. That's a real simple issue to understand, and it's easy to get our arms around. And it's kind of red meat. And we get offended by that. But we're not sure how we should be offended by the banks being bailed out by the same American taxpayer that bought that EBT card is the same American taxpayer that bailed out the richest people in this country to the tune of about $1.2 trillion. So I do have a little streak in me that wonders why we are so offended by the simplicity of one and not as offended. We are offended. I mean, if someone asked me, what was the most important day in the beginning of a Trump campaign or a Trump candidacy or a Trump presidency? When you talk about what led the liberals in a far left direction, I would argue the primary driver was income inequality. It was something that resonated. Now, their answer and solution to income inequality is something far different than mine. I don't know that I've got an answer to income inequality. I don't. I just know I have a problem with it. I just don't think it's healthy for a country to allow the richest 1% to continue to accumulate more and more and more and more of its country's wealth at the expense of the middle 20%. And you can say, Reb, well, I mean, they're not taking anything. No, they're not. They're not doing anything illegally. They have lobbied their government to advance certain legislation that allows for them to become more profitable. I don't have a problem with that. But we've got a big debate in America today about morale or immorality, or what's moral, what's immoral, what's ethical, what's unethical. And I just don't know how those people go to Davos knowing full well that the American taxpayer is the reason they were able to receive a lifeline. Period. I mean, if the American taxpayer had been asked, we're talking about referendums, school board referendum. If the American taxpayer had been asked in 2008, November 20, 2008, do you or do you not want your tax dollars saving the financial well-being of this country? I think in large numbers, the American taxpayer would say, yeah, I do. I mean, I don't want to go off into the abyss. Scares the daylights out of me. If you rephrase the question and say, would you want your tax dollars to save this country from financial disaster, and 3 years later, all the very people who led us into the financial abyss are made whole and in a private jet going back to Davos? Let me ask you a question. I'm going to use you as a case study. What do you say when I ask you the question, Reb, as an American taxpayer, do you want your tax dollars being involved in a piece of legislation that allows this country to not have a complete and total financial meltdown to the point that you go to the ATM machine and weren't able to get $100 out?
Of course.
Okay, let me add this other nugget. What if I asked you, Reb, as part of that involvement, we're going to allow Wall Street to get back on its feet, to reinstitute multi-million-dollar bonuses, and the very banks of which are partially responsible, not solely responsible, but are partially responsible for the financial meltdown they're going to be made whole again. And in 5 or 6 years, they'll be getting multi-million-dollar bonuses. They'll be on a private jet going to Davos. Your answer would still be?
It makes it harder to deal with.
And it should make it harder.
Yeah.
We should all be pissed off, big time, that happened. And I don't agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in that, a country that allows for the creating of a billionaire is an immoral country. I would never argue that. I think the free market enables people to prosper to degrees that we can't fathom. Good for them. Good for Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and some of the others who have become enormously wealthy by producing a product of which people have a burning desire for. That is the fundamental of the free market. My problem is the American taxpayer came to the rescue of a group of people who, once again, were not solely responsible, but partially responsible for financial disaster that caused this country a lot of problems. And now they're back on their private jets in Davos lecturing to the rest of the world what needs to be done or not in matters relating to a global economy. That's my problem. And that's why I do have this issue with income inequality in America. It's hard to square up. I mean, I'm conflicted. It's hard for me to square up my belief, my fundamental belief in the free market, and the fact that a certain sector of our population have done an amazingly good job of rigging the game, and they're in Davos eating $32 hot dogs. Good for them. Mm-hmm. And there is no jealousy there. And I mean that sincerely. There's just a confusion I have with what the market allows and what it does not allow, and how this country has rigged and manipulated the market to advantage a select few. And they're not illegal. They're not unethical. I mean, there's legislation that allows, or there's laws that allow for, lobbying and a lot of other things. It's a very complex debate, a debate that I don't think we have enough of, and a debate that I think conservatives should pay close attention to. I mean, it's easy for AOC to say, that's immoral. It's real hard for a conservative, a free market believer to say, I got to figure out a way to square this up. And that's exactly where I am. And I'm being very candid. I have a hard time squaring that up.